working on section 22 now, and we're delving into some fresh territory here. And this is actually a very cool new technology that I want to discuss with you. Now, before I start reading straight up from the tutorial, I am going to pull in an outside resource here, and I'll probably share this link in the course shell as well. So I have this over on my second screen, and I'm pulling it over. And I wanted to find a spot where they explained it concisely and explained it well, and I found this page that I thought did a really nice job of it. Well, first of all, we should all know what an API is, and what that acronym stands for is Application Programming Interface. Really all that means is that somebody else has written application components that we can access without having to write their code. So we can do powerful things by just simply calling all their classes and methods, or subroutines, or whatever you want to call them. So hopefully that part is already a concept you have firmly in place. In fact, when we're using like jQuery, for example, it is a JavaScript library, but it's also an API in that we are pulling their methods. We just call them by name. So if we want to hide something, we just call the hide method, and it just hides. And it's beautifully simple. Now, what's unique about this one is this one actually is one that works over the web through HTTP. And they do a really nice little thing here. And they describe a couple of different things, so I don't want to miss anything here. But what they're indicating here is that not only does it work over the HTTP protocol, but it also follows this architecture called REST, or creating a RESTful application. So the question then becomes, okay, what is REST, right? Well, and it stands for representational state transfer. That it allows us to create web services that transfer, transfers state information over HTTP, because we don't have that capability within HTTP itself. So it allows it to act more like a proper application when it really, it doesn't have that capability natively. So they give an example here that, like Twitter, for example, has a bunch of REST APIs for their platform. And you know what? A lot of big websites do. And a lot of times if you want to discover what those are, so in other words, you want to write code for your website that interfaces with theirs, they have these libraries you can just go download or research, learn the commands, drop their code in, create a link to their website, and it just works, right? That's a beautiful thing. So like you could drop in like a Facebook like button on your page, that type of thing. They show you how the API kind of sits in the middle of an application. So it says here that, if you're thinking of basically either coming in from a browser or coming in from a mobile app, it'll still go through the same interface, and then ultimately interface with the application that we have running on our server based on Windows, of course. But it acts as kind of like a buffer in between, so that we can call commands to the web API and not have to worry about the actual commands that go to the programming language on the back end. All right. Notice that it supports a bunch of different technologies, but some of the characteristics that I think are interesting, aside from it being RESTful, it does work well with ASP.NET. It works great with HTTP. But look at some of the technologies that we use to do our data transmission. And we have, the really popular now JSON format, which is, really primary for this type of architecture. It also does the XML and the BSON formats too. But I will tell you, JSON is predominant, probably like 99% or something like that in this framework. It can also be hosted, so if you want to run it on your server, you can use your own server to run it, or like a lot of people do is they just tie into online repositories. And it gives us some capabilities that are pretty darn powerful. Okay, I think that's enough right now. And I do want to mention that it's not necessarily a specific set of technologies as much as it is kind of a way of doing things. And that's kind of really the whole concept of REST to begin with. And I know that that's kind of vague a little bit. One thing I do also want to point out is this website that I'm on right now. This is kind of a neat site if you guys haven't played with this one. And you can see they focus a lot on the modern technologies that are out there in web development. And you can see they now have an ASP.NET Core section, which I find interesting because I didn't notice that the last time I was on here, and it was a while ago. But they have some really cool tutorials and information. So if you guys are curious about learning some of these technologies you see listed in the title bar here, come to this site and check it out. All right, back over to our PDF file here on section number 22. And the goal of why we even have Web API, a lot of it really kind of rose from the fact that mobiles was really taking a lot of prevalence out in the surfing world, like how people deliver applications. And you know what? That hasn't changed. In fact, it's become even more prevalent, which then, of course, makes this even a more important technology. So one of the things that happens when we do the HTTP applications, and you can see here, is the fact that we can actually do what we call remote procedure calls. So we can actually bring in methods from applications to run in our browser that are residing on a server somewhere rather than necessarily being written directly into the code that we're operating. And then when you think about that, that's really powerful, right? Because and that equates to that thing I was talking about with Twitter or Facebook, where you can actually leverage their APIs and pull in their tools by just simply creating a link to their server, wherever that is, and calling in the method. And that really is kind of like a wow when you start to realize what that capability is. All right, we are getting to the point here where they are asking us to do a little bit of work, so why don't we go ahead and actually start doing that work. Because the last couple sections that we went through, we didn't have any work to do, so I'm kind of looking forward to going back to coding here. All right, moving the tutorial off to the second screen as per normal, and let's get back over to Visual Studio. If you still have your other stuff open, I'm going to go ahead and close it. You should do the same, because if you notice in step 1 here on page 197, or excuse me, 198, they do want us to create a new project. So let's go ahead up to the File menu here, choose New, choose Project, and as per typical, we are going to create a new web application. You do want us to call this the Web API Demo. You guys know the routine here, so we're just using the same approach that we always use. Make sure it's .NET Framework, folks, not Core. So we're going to do Web API Demo. I'm going to probably, I'm going to throw it in my Razor demo folder. I really don't care, just because. We get to the subsequent dialog now, and now instead of choosing MVC, we are going to stick with empty, by the way. We are going to choose Web API, and that's probably one that you've been seeing here. So it's just a checkbox that makes it happen. Go OK. And really all this does is it just builds out the right folders for us into the project. Since the project is empty, there's not going to be a lot of starter material in there at all. All right. I want to take a look. Doesn't look all that much different, but you notice that there is a correlation here with the standard MVC architecture, right? And you notice that we do have controllers and we do have models. What's the piece that's missing? Views, right? And that's kind of interesting to note. So that's one thing that you should take note of. Let's jump over to the models folder. We're on step number 6 now. And they want us to right-click and go ahead and add a class. Now, notice that as I click on the models folder, wait, that's not here, right? So now where do I get it from? Well, you actually have to go all the way to the bottom, right? Where they put it. All right. Here we come up with the class designation. And I'm trying to figure out what they're naming it. So down on top of page 201, they do want us to type in employee CS, capital E. I added the file extension, but it'll do it automatically. Click the Add button, builds a new C# file for us with nothing inside of it. And then we're going to begin to add a little bit of code. Now, remember, we are in the models folder, so what we are doing here is we're setting up basically the structure for a database table, right, or for our information. They have a number of fields that they have pre-built. I'm just going to copy and paste from the PDF. You can't see me doing it, but here it is. Drop them right in here. And those pasted in beautifully. All right, so you can see we have basically 4 data fields. We have an ID, a name, a date time for joining date, and an age, all of them with their getters and setters. Now we're going to go ahead and on step number 9, bottom of 201, we're going to right-click the controller folder and add a controller to go with. So we're going to click Add and then choose a controller. The scaffolding dialog comes up. This time we're not choosing the top one like we've been in the habit of doing, right? Because we're working with Web API now, we are going to Web API 2 controller. We are choosing an empty one. We're going to go ahead and click Add. We're going to need to name this. And since we're working with an employee model, let's go ahead and call this employee. And go ahead and click Add. It's building out all of our structures for us. And now we have our employee controller with the default content embedded. All right. There are some default things that are in there, and we will need apparently to make some adjustments to this. So now I'm at the bottom of page 202, by the way, if you're wondering, in step number 12. And now you'll see as you scroll down to page 203 that they have a number of different things that we're going to need to add to this. And what's going to happen is we're adding a bunch of information that's going to help us structure our application. So a number of different things are going to be happening in here. So we've got to be really careful about how we add them. And all the code is going to sit inside of this set of curly brackets. I'm going to pull it in piece at a time. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in this structure here. We are going to be creating a new instance, so that was not a very pretty copy-paste, was it? So let's clean it up. I'm going to try to get it into the format you see in the book. So we're going to be creating a new instance of employee. Notice the square brackets in there. It is not finding the namespace right now. I'm not in panic mode on it yet, so please keep that in mind. And then I'm going to try to separate the data in much the same way that they're doing it, and that's after every comma here. So really what you're seeing here is actually a string of serialized data, right? So you should start to recognize that format, because really what we're doing and is creating JSON data, right? JavaScript object notation. And a lot of people, if they would code this, me included, would probably actually list it more like this. So I'm going to kind of format it in the way that I would do it so you can see. Now, the way the book is doing it is more efficient on space. But in terms of the readability of it, I'm going to argue that this is probably cleaner. So you see like the approach there. So whatever works for you, but I would probably do it like this. And you can tell right away what we're doing is really we're seeding in information here, right? So we're taking all the data fields that were predefined in the other class and applying basically new instances of data into the table. So if you want, you can arrange your data the same way that I'm doing it. And I know I'm looking at the clock right now and realizing that we're running out of time, so I apologize for that, but we'll do what we can here to get you out on time. All right. So this is the way that I would format it if I was typing it out by hand, because I'm not a computer and I find this easier to read. Not that it's really that hard to read in the other format, but I think it's a little cleaner. Now, we're going to jump down and add the next block of code here. And hopefully as we add some of this other stuff, this code that we have here will start to clean up. Okay, the next little block of code is going to go after the semicolon here. And this is where we're putting in an enumeration. And basically, this is going to be pulling back a bunch of data. The book formats it like this. It doesn't matter how you format it, of course, but if you want to follow the structure and the appearance. We have another one that we're pulling in. This is the HTTP action result get employee. That's going to drop in right below this one. Oops, I copy pasted copy first. So let's drop that in here. And once again, I'm going to clean up the code to make it a little bit more readable for myself. Separating out each lines. And if you want to break up your if statement here, go for it. That might actually be okay for you. And then end it, something like this. All right. Now, if you're following this as closely as I'm following this, you're probably going to notice that we have the employee underlining. And really what we're trying to do here is we are trying to pull in the model that we created, right? But it's not pulling in. And the reason why is we don't have the right library call for it. So we can actually go to the quick fixes here and notice that the first option that they offer is a quick fix using Web API demo models is actually the one you want to choose. And as soon as you add that to the import statements or the using statements at the top, you'll notice that now we're able to pull in our own model. Otherwise we can't, and we can't really instantiate the data properly. All right, as we move on down to the next step, which is step number 13, top of page 204, they ask us to actually go ahead and run the application. So let's go ahead and do that. All the files will, of course, save. It'll run, compile, and build the application. And here is our browser. And then they do want us to append to the URL after it loads API/employees. So don't freak out to this message because we set up an index controller or a home controller. So we're typing employees, API/employees. And then all of a sudden, notice what it's doing. And this is kind of weird because mine is not providing the same output that I'm seeing in the book. I don't know if you're getting the same result here, so I'm waiting to kind of see if my students are in the same boat. Yeah, and that error that you got was normal. What you have to do is append this to the URL. And ideally, if this worked correctly, what should be happening is it should be pulling back that data that we built in the one class file and putting it in here and showing it to us in XML format. Well, the thing that's interesting about XML files is when you pull them up in a browser, they won't render, but they will display the contents of the code, right? And the funny thing about XML is you can actually apply CSS to it and make it pretty. But I guess right now I'm a little concerned that it's not actually pulling back the stuff the way I thought it was. So I'm going to actually go back and just really quick, just double check. Okay, this all looks okay to me. And then make sure there's no syntax problems here. I mean, we got the libraries in place. We have all the methods in place. All right. So I'm actually going to, I'm going to do a save all, even though I think everything's already saved. And I'm going to come back up here and do a rebuild really quick. So hopefully maybe that'll flush any things out of memory that are causing it to misbehave. And it seemed to have succeeded. Let's go ahead and run it again. And then pull up that same URL. You know, and if we don't get this to work tonight, I guess we're saving it for next week. And I'm getting the same thing. So we are having some sort of an issue here. So, you know, and ideally, like if you would start entering in the actual employees with ID numbers like this, then you would start to see each individual one, and that's actually not happening. So if I come up with a fix for this, I'll append a video or add a video to this one to help clarify it, but we are out of time here in class, unfortunately, and these are the last steps. So hypothetically, this should have worked. All right, and that's kind of like the grand experiment here. But like I said, I'll try to add a video and clarify it. So thank you for being patient and sticking with me to the bitter end here. All right, we'll see you in the next video.